Hello and welcome to this AHDB webinar entitled Chemical Weed Control Options for Field-Grown Ornamental Crops. I'm Wayne Brough, AHDB Ornamental Knowledge Exchange Manager. We've got two speakers today. We've got David Talbot covering weed control in field-grown hardy nursery stock. So David will be covering weed control in tree and rose production, general hardy nursery stock, seed beds and herbaceous. Following David, we've got Chloe, who'll be talking about weed control in field-grown cut flowers. And again, Chloe will be covering a number of crops, including narcissus, peony, gladioli, and sweet williams. As I say, each will be followed by 5 minutes of questions. For those who don't know David and Chloe, I'll just give a quick potted history before I pass over to David for the first presentation. David is a consultant with ADAS, having worked with ADAS for 13 years. He carries out a mixture of grower consultancy and applied research. David previously worked quite closely with John Atwood, who was the weed control specialist for ADAS. And since John's retirement, he's picked up his mantle and now leads the weed research in ornamental crops within ADAS. Chloe has also been working with ADAS for about the last 7 years. The main focus of her work is on growing media, bedding and pot plants, hardy nursery stock, field-grown cut flowers. She manages various herbicide trials on field-grown cut flowers, both with ADAS and in collaboration with the Cut Flower Centre. And she'll be sharing most of the recent updates with us this morning.
Welcome everyone. So an update on weed control options in field-grown hardy nursery stock. So a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today, some comments on contact herbicides. There's been some recent changes, and then some chemical weed control in various aspects of field production, trees, roses, general field grown stock, seed bed production, and a little bit on field grown herbaceous. So starting off with contact herbicides, the products we've left to work with all have some limitations. We recently lost Dicot, which was a useful product, so that's left us with fewer products. So now we have Shark, which is the AMU for use in nursery stock. It's a useful product, but it does have some gap weed control spectrum, like most of the contact herbicides we have left to work with. So it's not very good on grasses, groundsel, and mayweeds. Other products, contact products, include phenolisan, Cowton Gold. Those are both pelargonic acid products, and these are a newer product. They've got quite a few requirements that growers really need to get right in order to get good results from them. So you need to be warm enough when you apply them, over 50 degrees. Weeds need to be as small as possible, really. Generally with weeds, the smaller they are, the easier they are to kill. So ideally less than 10 centimeters for these products, and they need to be actively growing. So the recent dry spell much of the country has meant that these products may not have worked very well for some people if you tried them. So it's really getting everything together to make them work. So if you are irrigating crops, when you've irrigated, get the products on after them when it's warm enough. They've got very detailed product labels, and it's very well worth reading those, because it's got advice for mixing them and agitating them to get the best results from them. So they're products that need a bit more care and attention. They're not the sorts of things we can just whop in a spray tank and get a good result with, without this care and attention and thinking about all these different aspects I've covered. And we've also got Dow Shield, which is pyrrolid. You need to avoid any drift or crop contact with this. It's worse risk of damage when things are soft earlier in the year. It can cause a bit of leaf cupping, and you can get some root uptake from it, particularly in maiden production. They're generally more susceptible to root uptake, particularly when you spot treating things like creeping thistle. Another one we've got is Styrane High Load HL, which is an EAMU. Can volatilize in hot weather, so that's something to think about when you apply it. Again, weeds need to be actively growing. This is a very useful product for taking out volunteer potatoes, which can be a problem in field production depending on previous rotations, but often potatoes feature in irrigated land where people are renting land to get around things like root blast disease. Downfield also has an effect on volunteer potatoes, but I wouldn't say it's as good as styrene high load. It causes some stunting. It doesn't cause total desiccation of the leaf. It will stunt them and result in fewer daughter potatoes being produced, but they will still produce some. So styrene is the product of choice for potatoes. Glyphosate, various products approved for in ornamentals, non-edible crops. One to be careful with, rosaceous crops are very susceptible to it. Every year we have compensation claims where people spray it on arable crops and it drifts on to typically fruit propagators. So they're rosaceous crops, things like raspberries. So you don't want to be using that in rosaceous crops, and it can be damaging to other crops, but useful prior to planting, etc. So other contact herbicides we've got for grass control. We lost good old Aramo a few years ago, so Centurion Max has really become the product to replace that. It's been quite widely tested on a range of species, seems to be pretty safe. You can get a little bit of scorching on soft growth, but crops generally quickly grow away from that. So that's a useful product. Again, get the grass weeds when they're small, the smaller the better really. And other products include Fusilade Max and Laser, which both have EAMUs. Of course, good old glyphosate's a good product for grass control, but the same caveats to crop safety apply as covered previously. So moving on to chemical weed control in field tree production. This is an area where we've done quite a lot of research recently in the ongoing programme of work on weed control funded by AHDB. So this table just gives the best treatment that growers can currently use for post-planting of dormant tree stocks. And you'll see we've got 4 products in there. Sencrex Flow is something that came through an EAMU relatively recently. It's widely used in potatoes. We weren't sure how high a rate we could use, and we've been looking at that as one of the aspects of this work, increasing the rate. These are results from last year. I carried out the last score on final year's work of this trial last week, and we increased the rate of Sencrex up to 1.15 litres a hectare, which is the maximum rate. And I'm pleased to report we haven't seen any detrimental effects from that. So we didn't think we could get away with rates that high, so that's encouraging. So those were products rates. After 12 weeks, we had just 2.3% weed cover, which was very pleasing. As ever, we're looking at some experimental products. We're not really covering many of those in today's presentation because it doesn't really tell you much, but they're products that are further down the line that are coming. There is one new active we're looking at that looks promising. And it's interesting to note that some of these experimental products in this trial did actually produce even better weed control than this 2.3% we're reporting here. So there is a bit of positivity on the horizon. They're probably a couple of years away as yet. So moving on, Flexdor, Springbok and Benzart 500 performed well. Gave us 2.3% weed control at 2 weeks. It was perhaps a little dry when that went on at that time of year, but as long as the crops hardened, they seem safe on the crop. So that's a useful mix there. And then onto the post-heading back treatments that went on early spring as soon as the crop was headed back while still dormant. Again, a similar mix to the products going on post-planting, but again, giving us good weed control at 12 weeks after treatment. So thinking about rose production, another important field grown crop. So residual herbicides. So getting the herbicides on as soon as the dormant rose stocks are planted in the spring, planted out of cold store, so getting those on as quickly as you can before the crop starts moving. If they have started to move, you can expect a little bit of scorch, but the crop generally grows away from this without any problems. Sencrex Flow, we're using lower rates for roses at present, but the work that's recently been done on trees that I just covered may mean that those rates could be increased, but we haven't got any data to support that yet. So the rate for Sencrex is 0.73 litres per hectare on the stocks. Stomp Aqua, the normal EAMU rate. Sunfire at 0.48 litres per hectare, that's the EAMU rate. And Benzar 500 SC Lenasil, which is at 0.4 litres per hectare. And that performs well, giving us good weed control. And generally carries us quite well through to our next residual top-up, which goes on post-budding later in the year. So we're using metodichlor there and Flexidor, and also Benzar 500. Now, Flexidor has been some changes to the label that in recent years, so now it's only one application per crop, which is really a limitation, but something we have to work with. And in budded crops, it seems most safe post-budding. We can use the other products like Sencrex when the crop's really dormant, so that's the best place for it in programs in these sorts of crops. So post heading back for these crops the following year in spring, while still dormant, getting the Sencrex flow on again, also Stomp Aqua, Sunfire. But here we're using a lower rate of Sencrex flow still, because potentially you can get root uptake during that rapid growth in the maiden year. Sencrex can and does have the potential to move, although that may not be as serious as we thought, and using Stomp Aqua there at 2 litres, so slightly lower rate, and Sunfire at the EMU rate. So moving on into chemical control in field grown stock. So typically most field grown stock gets herbicide after planting, or if it's a crop that's been carried over into its second year in the winter when it's still dormant. But these start to wane. Most residual herbicides typically last about 12 weeks. By about 12 weeks, most products will be fizzling out, some a little bit before. So we've got fewer reliable contact herbicides, as I just covered. So we need to really make more use of residuals wherever we can. And we've got Dual Gold, which came through under an EAMU a few years ago, and that's a useful top-up application. It's a problem that we can only use it in May, but a problem we have to work with. It's relatively persistent, but probably wouldn't last a full 12 weeks on its own. So there's been some interest lately in mixing Dual Gold with a product active called Nicosulfuron, which is Samson Extra. Various products, but this product has a caveat that you need to apply it by mid-June. But if you are applying it with Dual Gold, the Dual Gold caveat at end of May overrules that. So you could put in with Dual Gold in May or follow up later in June to top up, whichever suits. Some people have looked at putting these on as inter-row treatments where they have concerns over crop safety, and that's a possibility. And depending on the density of the canopy of the crop, may even get more of the active into where you want it. Ideally, applying them to moist soil. I know it can be a challenge at this time of year, but it's picking the day if you've got no irrigation and working with the weather. But this may make it quite challenging, that's for sure. So thinking about Samson Extra, quite persistent, more so than Dual Gold. It broadens the weed control spectrum of Dual Gold, so worth tank mixing. It can be a little bit damaging, so as with any herbicide, if you're not familiar with it, it's worth carrying out trials on smaller areas of production before going ahead and treating your whole crop. So residual herbicides post-budding, just to recap, we're looking at Flexidor and Soltan, metodichlor, there are other products, butane S, etc., or Flexidor and Springbok. Now the beauty of Springbok, it gives improved control of cleavers, cranebill, poppy and small nettles. So if those weeds are a problem for you, that's one to definitely worth thinking about instead of traditional straight metodichlor as Soltan or butane S. So moving on to seed beds. A lot of work was done on this 2 years ago in a project called HNS 155. These are pre-emergent residual herbicides that prove effective and safe. Lots of ones we've already talked about there. We looked at a range of species in this trial, so it's too much in the trial to cover and to give you exact rates, but the report has got some very useful tables in, and that's worth getting hold of if you're interested in treating seed beds. Just a note on Centium, clomazone, it can and often does cause some transient yellowing, but the crop grows away from this without any trouble after a number of weeks. Dual gold, may only, we looked at. Just a point on dual gold, in these trials we haven't got the current EAMU, so the rate is slightly higher in the report than is on the EAMU, but you must not use that high rate. Use the rate on the EAMU, which is 0.78 litres per hectare. Goltix WG and Goltix 70SC. Goltix WG is authorised under the LTA EU, but it's not currently marketed as far as I'm aware, so if you've got a bit in your stores that can be used up. But Goltix 70SC has got an EAMU, which is a useful development. Now, just on Goltix, the two products there are exactly the same concentration, so it's just a name change. But it's worth noting that some of the species were treated with rates of up to 3 litres per hectare in these trials with Goltix WG, but the Goltix 70SC EAMU, which is the one we're working with going forward, has a maximum rate of 2 litres per hectare as a single application, so slightly lower rate there. Springbok we also looked at. So looking at those products alone, as with most herbicides, get some gaps in the weed control spectrum. So Stomp Aqua plus one or more of the above gives improved weed control and was safe for some species. And again, that information is detailed within those tables in that report. So post-emergence herbicides for seed beds. Again, this was looked at in the same project. Centium also produced some transient yellowing. It's got an EAMU. It's useful to note that the EAMU restricts use on up to 6 leaves post-emergence. So that gives you an idea of timing when you need to get it on by. Something we have to work with. Dual gold, same comment about the rates there. It's a slightly lower rate under the EAMU than was looked at in the trials. We haven't got the EAMU at that point, so we were kind of guessing a bit at the rate and using the best knowledge we had at the time. Same comments as covered on Goltix 70SC and also Springbok. So some post-emergence weed control of seedling weeds. Some general comments there. Say your herbicides haven't performed very well because they went on in slightly too dry conditions. Then Madifan is a good product to use. Got available as Betamil Flow, causal SC. Controls small weeds, seedlings are in the crop. It can cause a little yellowing on the crop, but they generally grow away from that without any bother. And depending on the product, up to 2 to 3 applications. So, dormant season treatments, we're working with Stomp Aqua and Springbok, and Flexidor alone or in mixtures where you haven't used it at another time of year, or Sencrex Flow. Just a point on Sencrex Flow, it can be a little bit damaging, and we talked about some of the slightly more cautious rates on roses in particular, but a good approach that I've used with some of the growers I work with is increasing the rate gradually, say by 10%, stepping that up each year. And if you do get a bit of damage, it's not catastrophic. You can say, I'm happy with that, we'll go a bit more next year. It's always a balance with residual herbicides, particularly some such as Sencrex, between, and Centium with leaf yellowing are covered, between a little bit of crop damage and getting good weed control. a little bit of crop damage. It doesn't always look that pretty, but as long as the crop grows away from it, you don't necessarily need to worry about it. And hand weeding is getting increasingly expensive, labour concerns going forward, so it's worth accepting a little damage if it gives you improved weed control. So moving on to chemical weed control in field-grown herbaceous. Current herbicides for use over the crop, we've got Devrinol, and that's recently come back under EAMU. It does have a caveat, but it can only be used between 1st of November and the end of February. I suspect that's because it degrades rapidly in bright sunlight, but we can still get bright days at that time of year. So anyone using Devrinol at that time of year, it's worth noting that it doesn't want to be applied on a bright day. Benzar 500 SC, Lenasil, rate of 0.4 litres a hectare. Good old Flexor once per crop again. Dual Gold in May, and Stalwater's Metachlor. Just a note on Metachlor, there's a maximum legal rate of 1.5 litres a hectare a year. And that gives 750 grams per year. And we can't apply more than 1,000 grams in 3 years. So if you are using that 1.5 litre rate, it's fine in a crop rotation if you're not going to go back in the product. But if you're wanting to use it annually, you have to use a lower rate as there, which gives you 333 grams a year, which keeps everything legal. That's me done. I hope that's provided some useful information for everyone, and would welcome any questions that people have.
Thank you, David. We've had 1 or 2 people submit questions. First one I've got here is there likely to be a replacement for Sumimax after heading back? Seems we are going to be doing away with an application.
Unfortunately not at the moment. It was a very useful herbicide. There have been supply issues with it for 2 or 3 years, and people have been struggling to get it. So those that had some in store were okay, but no, sadly not. It's a useful product we've lost. It's the same general trend, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. We are struggling also for weed control on container grown crop, and having to resort to physical weed control methods like pot toppers and loose mulches. What's going to be the situation with field grown crops? Has anything been looked at there in terms of physical weed control?
I have had a grower that has had a look at using some bark in field grown production, obviously quite a high cost, but they didn't have very pleasing results, and it's not something they've continued with. That was a one-off, and it would need to be looked at again, perhaps, but it's certainly a challenge. There are, interestingly, some paper. There's a paper mulch recently become available from in Germany, but it's been used in organic production out in Germany, I believe, and it seems to last quite well. So that might be something to think about. There are people planting through plastic as an alternative to herbicides, but plastics are under the cosh, and then you've got the disposal cost of getting rid of them. So that's sort of where we are, really.
Okay, thank you. Again, coming back to containerized rather than field grown, got a question here about what can be used to control eradicate willow herb in containerized trees pre-emergence and post-emergence?
So if they're in containerized trees, you could always put some, assuming that the stem's lignified, you could always put the contact herbicide on to kill those out, such as shark, to take them out, save the physical hand weeding, assuming there's no leaf down there that's going to catch it. That's the useful option in the winter. You may want to add a wetter to improve its efficacy. And then residual wise, we have got Devrinol, so that's come back. So that's a useful one as a winter treatment against willow herb.
Okay, thank you. We did more of a we got well. It's more of a statement here rather than a question. I think backing up what you just said, Shark is very good at controlling emerged willow herb. I presume you
Yes,
agree with that?
Yeah, it won't have any residual effect whatsoever.
Yeah. Any sort of comments about Finelson? There's a comment here about it. It's expensive and not particularly cost effective on large areas. Do you find that, or alternatives perhaps?
Yes, it is expensive, but it's sadly one of a few tools in the box. I haven't done any calculations on the cost of it versus hand weeding, but I surmise it's still significantly cheaper than hand weeding. So you always want to be avoiding any hand weeding. That's the ultimate goal, really, or reducing it to an absolute minimum.
Okay.
I mean, it's not uncommon these days for people to spend tens of thousands on hand weeding, particularly on a reasonable to large scale.
Yeah. Any experience on field-grown conifers to weed control over the crop?
It's not something we've done a lot of work on recently. So I'd have to come back on that one. Could we put a few notes out to delegates, Wayne?
Yeah, we can sort that out, or I can. I've got the person who submitted the question. I can sort of submit that to you directly, and you can sort that out afterwards if need be.
That'd be great.
Can I ask about? I know you didn't want to sort of say too much about the coded products because it's difficult because we don't know what the future of them will be exactly and the timescales, but from the ones you've been looking at, is the future rosy in terms of the potential for some of them coming through?
Hopefully, there's one that's looking promising. That's hopefully only a couple of years away, which is, it's nice to have something on the horizon, to be honest. Can't say too much because we're bound by confidentiality by the company behind it that are working on it. So they're working hard to get it through, obviously, because there's a gap in the market for new products. So yeah, hopefully watch this space and we'll have something in a year or two. And then that's when the real beauty of the coded work comes through, because growers can be told product code in the trials, and you can look back and you can see that the work's already been done. So hopefully as soon as the product comes through, you can pick it up and work with it. So
okay. Again, I think rather like the field-grown conifers, you may want to defer this one, but a question here about weed controlling Christmas trees. And any updates there?
yeah, so people are using Syncrex in those, also Flexidor, things like Gold Ticks. It's like most crops, it's not that easy to build a program, and also worth having a look at dual gold in them, and possibly the Samson Extra that I talked about to give some summer weed control. Not all of those would necessarily want to go over the crop. Some might be better as an inter-row application, but that's not easy in more mature plantations. So that's, yeah, there's certainly products there.
Okay, thank you for that.
And sorry, can I just add, Wayne, glyphosate is also used in the winter as well in Christmas trees. And when they're waxed up, it's safe. So.
Okay.
But you need to use the older formulations without the wetters, the non-bioactive types.
A couple of quick ones just to finish then. Have you looked at crop safety in asters with the products you have used in trials?
Not as far as I'm aware. I'll double check and we'll put that in the notes.
Okay, and again, coming back to Christmas trees, have you considered? I think it should be shikara in Christmas trees.
No, because it's not legal. Basically, it is only used in non-cropped areas. People are using it, and they shouldn't be. But it can turn things very yellow because it can move down the soil profile in wet conditions. So it is a very risky strategy, and obviously one that we can't condone at the moment. We'd love to get an EAMU for it and look at it at perhaps lower rates, but to date that hasn't been possible, sadly.
Okay. Just looking at the time. Okay, one more then. Not quite a herbicide, more of a soil disinfectant, but any update on Basamid?
It's sort of hanging in there, really. It's, I believe, emergency approval at the moment. I don't think we're going to have it long term, which is again going to make life harder, not only for nursery stock but for fruit world as well. So yeah, persistent soil sterilants, persistent herbicides are under the cosh, and I hope I'm wrong, but I can't see it being there for that many years.
I think you're right. I think you're right, David. Having been, sorry.
The companies behind it are working very hard to support it and keep it there. It's obviously a big product for them, but that's a state of play, I'm afraid.
Yes. Having been working behind the scenes with Belette, our crop protection officer, on this, we've been trying to put a robust case to maintain Basamid for the foreseeable future. But I think I agree with you, David, on that one. I think it's probably just going to be a matter of time now, unfortunately, with that. So if I can draw that session to a conclusion there, because we've just about exactly on time now, and if I can pass over to Chloe for our second presentation. So David, if you wouldn't mind muting and just closing your webcam, and I shall pass over to Chloe Whiteside for the presentation on weed controlling cut flowers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. So I can see my presentation. Hopefully everyone else can now see my presentation and hear me and see me. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about chemical weed control options for field-grown cut flowers. The structure of my talk, I just want to talk a little bit about the background, so kind of current situation, where we're at in terms of herbicides for field-grown cut flowers. And then, as Wayne mentioned in the introduction, the 4 crops that I'm going to focus on are Narcissus, Peony, Gladioli and Sweet Williams. The reason for this being that obviously there are a whole range of different crops that we could talk about, but these are 4 where there have been a lot of work done over the last few years. There's been some new products come forwards, so there's a lot more information to share about trials that have been done and ones that are also still ongoing at the moment. So as we know, cut flowers are a very high value horticultural product. However, there are actually very few specific label approvals for the use of herbicides in cut flower production. Generally, from a commercial perspective, the market for herbicides in ornamentals is seen as very small and the risks too great for new product development. So really we have to rely on products which are already authorised and have label approval on crops such as field vegetables or some arable products. And then we have to look at getting an extension of that authorisation for use within ornamentals. The difficulty is also greater because we have such a wide range of genera grown, each with their own herbicide sensitivities. So products that may be perfectly safe on some crops, you just can't use on others. So it's really difficult to try and find which are the most useful products and which are the most useful rates. So there's a lot more work involved in having to kind of find how to get the most out of these products that we have available to us. Obviously, weed growth impacts on yield and the quality of your crop, and it also makes things like stem picking a lot harder if you've got a lot of weeds there as well. So therefore, that's increasing your labour costs and your time. And we also have the issue of weeds encouraging pests and diseases into your crop. So if you can keep on top of your weeds right from the outset, then you have a better chance of keeping pests and diseases at bay as well. And as I mentioned, in order to do this, we need to be looking at the new and existing products already out there for their efficacy and safety on field-grown cut flowers. So I'm going to start with Narcissus first and kind of look at the current situation in terms of pre-emergence control. So what we have on here in this table, a list of products Lineron is no longer approved. Some of you will be very familiar with that. We have products on here which are useful, but some of them are kind of limited in their control options. Some products were seen as the rate of approval may be too low to give us the kind of persistence that we need. So things like metazoclor, dimethylamine P and metazoclor, so butazan, springbok. Other products like chlorprotham, pendimethalin, flufenicet, very good products, but all have limitations to their control. So, for example, chlorprotham actually works a lot better in cooler and damper conditions as opposed to warm and dry. And obviously, with kind of the seasons that we experience and the way that spring has been over the last couple of years, that's going to have a knock-on effect onto how long products like chlorprotham persist for. Pendimethalin, Stomp Aqua, a very good product, has a broad range of weeds that it controls, but there are a few key weeds in there, such as groundsel, which it just doesn't give the control on. So there are gaps in some of these products, and some of them they just don't really give the persistence that we would require. So Sencorex Flow, for example. So you may think of tank mixing that with something like Sunflower to give you better improved control. So some work has been carried out over the last few years by AHDB with AHDB. So this is some of the work that my colleagues Angela Huckle and Emily Lawrence were looking at dormant trial actives in 2017 to 18. I have listed some of the coded products on here, which I appreciate doesn't really mean much at the moment. But what we can say is that some of these products on here, like the 9987, that's seen as giving very good control for willow herb and groundsel, and is one of these products that we're hoping is going to come to market soon. By soon, I mean in the next couple of years. But it has come up a lot in various trials work and has given us good results. So that's a product that is looking promising. Also at the time, metabromeron was an experimental active, but we have since been given authorization through an EMU for the use of metabromeron in outdoor ornamental plant production on bulbs. So a range of different experimental actives, and then also approved actives in there, clomazone, chlorprotham, pendimethalin, metribuzin. So we get that wide range of weed control that we're looking at in this dormancy trial. One thing to note, however, on the chlorprotham, we are due to lose that towards the end of this year, so October 2020, that's up for expiry. So in terms of the trial timeline, so this is going back to 2017, the field planted in August, treatment applications in a dormancy period in November, a few little top-up treatments at early leaf emergence in January, and then weed assessments, phytotoxicity, and flower assessments as well. So leaving the crop in the ground rather than picking, so that we can look at any effects that the products may have on the actual flowers themselves as well. Generally speaking, we didn't see much at all in the way of phytotoxicity from the various products, whether they were applied alone or in tank mixes. And so you can see a shot here from February of the trial area, where really nice, clean looking crop, very few weeds, and as I say, very little phytotoxicity. So maybe a very slight amount of damage on a couple of leaf tips, but nothing that would make the crop unmarketable. One thing that we did see, it was just from this treatment. So this was Sencorex plus Stomp applied in the November dormancy period, and then this coded product, which was applied at very early leaf emergence in January. So as opposed to seeing nice straight stems, we were seeing some twisting and distortion from this product, but nothing else from any of the other actives that we were applying. So the summary from that trial was really that in terms of efficacy, products were very good. We were seeing very few weeds, and all except for that 9921 were looking promising to take forward. And as I mentioned previously, we have since had an EMU application approved and got the metabromeron product for use on bulbs. So just a note on the metabromeron product, it does come under 4 different names, or there's 4 different metabromide products out there: Inigo, Lianto, Praxim, and Soleto. But they are all the same thing. So they're all 500 grams a litre of active ingredient, metabromide, all a maximum individual dose of 2 litres a hectare, with 1 treatment per year, and it must be applied between 1st of September and 1st of December. So 4 different product names, but they are in effect the same thing. We've also looked at some post-cropping work. So this was a follow-up from the dormancy. So this was in 2018 to 19. Post-cropping weed treatments, it is important because obviously if you think when people go through and you're picking the crop and harvesting the crop, that's disturbing the soil layer and the herbicide kind of seal, which then will allow new weeds to germinate. And in some cases we've seen where actually if you don't keep in control of the weeds at the post-cropping stage, then that can have knock-on effects for the yields the following year, and in some cases up to 25% reduce yields because of the weed control at that post-cropping stage. So it is important to be looking at this stage of production as well. So you can see we've brought through a couple of those promising experimental treatments. So again, the 9987, that's the one that we're going through the authorization process at the moment. And then a list of approved actives that give us a wide range of weed control. So Sentium, Stomp Aqua, Butterflow, WinP and Curbflow. Lecter was in there as well. And I have a question mark over the availability of Lecter at the moment and whether or not that's still authorised and if that's coming back or not. So that's a slight uncertainty at the moment. So again, this is post-cropping trial. So the spray application went on in March with weed and phytotoxicity assessments after that. And then right up until November, we just put on the grower standard treatment in November just to keep weeds at bay up until the flowering period. So then we could look at any effects on flowering as well. So this is just a little snapshot of what we were seeing. So we've got Curbflow and Stomp Aqua, the grower standard on your left. And then this is this coded product again, this 9921. So this is the one where we saw these twisting stems in the dormancy trial. And what you can see here is just a complete loss of leaf turgor. And whereas you can see some buds forming in the grower standard treatment, there's really not a lot to see at the moment in this 9921. So that product's not really looking very promising, but everything else is giving us very good results. Again, we saw very few weeds and all product appeared commercially acceptable, with the exception of this one coded active. That brings us on to the most recent work where we're looking at dormancy again, so 2019 to 2020. So literally just finished this piece of work. More experimental actives because actually there's kind of more things coming through that are important for us to look at. And then a range of approved actives as well. So really kind of trying to spread the amount of different products that we can look at and look at in this dormancy period. And obviously now we've got metabromide in there as an approved active, so that comes under the Praxim name there. So this was an application of treatments in November of 2019, followed by a few treatments in January, and weed assessments, phytotoxicity assessments, and flower assessments at the end of the trial, so in March of this year. That's a project or piece of work which is still in the reporting stage, so the results have not yet been released, and reports not yet available. It should be available towards the end of this year. But what we can say is that we have seen very few weeds again from this dormancy trial, and everything that we tested, including the coded products, appeared to be safe. So we've got some really promising things coming through in terms of Narcissus weed control. So I've just summarised some of that information into grower suggestions for applications in the dormant period in November and then the post-cropping period in March. I won't read this all out to you because you can probably read it quicker than I can read it out. But as you can see, we've got some key products in there for the dormancy period. So the Stomp Aqua with Sencorex, or also with the addition of Centium in there as well. So the clomazone. In terms of post-cropping, where we have Curb Flow and Stomp Aqua, I have also then listed Curb and the Stomp Aqua and this coded product, which I appreciate it's not available right now, but it is one that has given us very good control and is proved to be safe, and it is one that we're confident we're going to have come through quite soon. So having that on there just kind of gives you confidence in that there are more things coming forward, and as David alluded to before, you know, there are some promising things on the horizon. Then we've also got things in there like Butterflow and Stomp Aqua, either alone or again, control is improved with the addition of this coded product, and then WingP and Centium as well. So there are options and different products that you can be using to give you a wide range of weed control with the crop safety as well. So now I want to move on to Peony and some work which is currently being done by Lyndon Mason at the National Cut Flower Centre. So Peony is a crop where there hasn't actually been a lot of work done over recent years, but they have had the opportunity to do some work this year. In terms of the current situation for Peony, generally it's pendimethalin and metribuzin at the pre-emergent stage, and then on a dormant crop, Lenasil and isoxaben. Again, these products, they are good, but they have some limitations to them. Sencorex Flow, for example, metribuzin, on very light or sandy soils, it does have the potential to be damaging as a result of leaching. In the dormancy period with the Benzar, we are now limited to an application of 0.4 litres a hectare, but you can repeat that up to a total of 1 litre a hectare. So you could do top-up treatments of Benzar as directed sprays into row during the growing season, and the crop would be tolerant of that. And the crop was also tolerant of Dow Shield at 0.5 litres a hectare, again as a directed spray in the growing season for thistle control. But really that's kind of where we are with peonies at the moment, with those few products available to us. So what they are doing at the Cut Flower Centre this year, they have a crop of peony which was planted last year. The area was sprayed off with Phenosan in early Feb, just to kind of clean the area up. And then they're looking at 4 different actives. So 3 of these are approved. So we've got Hurricane, Stomp and Sunfire, and then 1 coded product in there as well, which again is one that we are hoping will be coming through to market in the ornamental sector in the next couple of years. And they're also looking at different varieties, because sometimes obviously you can get different susceptibilities to herbicide damage depending on the variety. So this is work in progress at the moment, just to show you that the treatments went on in early March, so just after the Phenosan treatment was applied, and then they've been looking at weeds and phytotoxicity, and the trial is still in the ground at the moment. Oops. In terms of results so far, so this is the variety Coral Charm, and we've got the coded product on the left, and then we've got Hurricane and Stomp. And we are seeing some phytotoxicity effects on this variety. So you can see the kind of pinking discoloration to the leaf edges, and then also with the picture on the right where that's kind of spreading into the leaf as well, and also some distortion and a bit of twisting to the leaves as well there. Now it is worth pointing out that when the treatments were applied, the Coral Charm was already actually just poking above the surface. So in effect, these treatments almost went on as a post-emergence treatment. So you can see that obviously that's causing damage. You wouldn't therefore expect to say that these could go on as a post-emergent treatment, but it's worth bearing that in mind, that because of weather conditions at the time, these ones were already poking through the surface when the treatments were applied. But there's also the fact that this phenol sand went on as well in late February, so there could also be a relationship between the products there as well. That can't be ruled out. But there is damage occurring from all of the treatments on the coral charm. If you look at other varieties, so this is Hurricane and Stomp Aqua again on a different variety, and you can see that there is a very small amount of pinking on some of the leaves, but it's not as severe as what we've seen in the coral charm, and you haven't really got the leaf distortion and twisting that we saw in the previous pictures. So in terms of kind of results and going forward, they are seeing some promising results at the moment in terms of certain actives on peony, but it's too early to really be giving any concrete recommendations. So realistically, work would need to continue for another year, and probably different weather conditions as well. So then we could really look at the rates and what is safe and what isn't. So that's work in progress, and will continue. And then we now look at gladioli. So again, this is a crop where there hadn't really been done much work done for a few years. So last year, as part of the SCEPTREplus project, we did look at a range of trial actives on a crop of gladioli in King's Lynn. Again, experimental actives in there as well as things that are already approved. So we were just looking at products on their own rather than in tank mixes. And then we've got this experimental product of 9900 where we just looked at 2 rates just to see whether there was risk with the higher rates of phytotoxicity. So again, all of these products were applied on their own, and they were all applied over the crop rows as opposed to inter-row. So we had our field planted in May, and then the application of the treatments in June. So probably about 2 weeks after application was when the crop began to emerge, and we could look at weeds and phytotoxicity from June, July and August. And then in September, when flowers started to emerge, then we could look at any effect on flowering as well. So basically what we were seeing was good weed control, but crucially no phytotoxicity from any of the treatments that we applied. So even with the coded products and that one product where we looked at the high rate and the lower rate, even with the higher rate, we weren't seeing any issues. And you can see from the colours of the flowers, we didn't see any damage to the flowers or any discoloration or faded flower blooms either. So really quite promising results from that trial. So we're seeing good weed control. All treatments appeared to be safe. From that, suggestions for application prior to crop emergence, we used Sencorex at 0.75 litres a hectare, Wing P at 3.5, Sunfire at 0.48 litres and Springbok at 2.5. So they all gave us good control and were safe at those rates when applied pre-emergence. But bear in mind that we didn't look at tank mixes. So something like Sunfire is primarily for grass control. It will give a little bit of broadleaf weed control as well, but primarily for grasses. So you may wish to mix that in with something else, and that's not something that we looked at in terms of crop safety. So it would be a tank mix at your own risk that you'd probably want to test prior to wide scale use. And we always say that, you know, if you're going to use products and rates that have come from trials, it's always best to test it yourself first, because we are doing this trial in 1 year in one particular set of weather conditions and on a particular soil type, and things can be slightly different year on year depending on the weather. So just that caveat in there that testing products first is always a sensible thing to do. The metabromeron was also safe, and the coded products were safe. So that really helps us in kind of building the case for bringing these new products forward and getting them onto the market. As I said, we didn't look at tank mixes. And finally, for Sweet Williams, so some work was done with AHDB and the Cut Flower Centre back in 2014 and 2015. From that, we kind of have this these suggestions here, or these recommendations for products that can be used safely on Sweet Williams, because Sweet Williams notoriously is quite a sensitive crop, so not an awful lot that can be used on them. So in terms of pre-emergence, generally Stomp Aqua and Goltix at lower rates, so 0.75 Stomp Aqua, 1 litre a hectare for Goltix, is generally what's commercially used for pre-emergence of Sweet Williams. There are then some products that can be applied at the 4-leaf stage, so some top-up treatments. So we've got Butazan, Springbok, Venzar and Shark. So I'll come back to Shark in a moment, but these are things that our Sweet Williams are tolerant of at that 4-leaf stage, just to give you a bit more ongoing persistence. And then in terms of a dormant crop, then we've got Devronol and Flexidor that we can use. So in terms of the Shark, that's something that we looked at the Cut Flower Centre. Obviously it's contact acting only, no residual effect, but good at getting rid of any of those kind of stubborn weeds that you don't really want to be there. So this picture just shows the effect of when we applied Shark on Sweet Williams. So you can see the picture on the left. This is 11 days after treatment, and it really did look quite severe, with really bleaching of the leaves there and damage to the crop. Not something that you would probably be too keen to see. But if you then look at 6 weeks after treatment, the crop grew through it absolutely fine, and there was no damage and there was no long-lasting effect, because obviously it's purely contact, so it had scorched those bits that it touched, but then the knock-on effect was that the remainder of the crop grew through nice and clean. And just kind of linking back a bit to what David mentioned, if you can tolerate a bit of crop damage earlier on, then as long as the plant or the crop grow out of it, then it is worth considering. So Sweet Williams will be tolerant of Shark and will grow away from that damage. So we're actually doing some work this year, again through SCEPTREplus. We're looking at some experimental actives again, but also some approved actives. So Stomp, Defy and Springbok, we did look at them all in quite great detail at the Cut Flower Centre a few years ago. But now we're looking at whether we can actually apply products between the rows rather than over the crop, and therefore get away with using higher rates of active. So therefore you should, in theory, get better persistence from your residuals and better weed control, but your effect of your risk of phytotoxicity on the crop is reduced because we've gone into row rather than over. So precision spraying and inter-row spraying is something that we're seeing more and more of, in particularly field-grown vegetables, and it is something that is done in ornamentals, but I think maybe going forwards is something that we might need to kind of focus on a bit more. So this is some work that is due to start really in the next week or so, over towards Spalding Way, and yeah, we will be looking at the effect of using precision sprayers with the Allium Nebraska Centre. So that's really much work in progress. That brings me to the end of my talk. I'm happy to take questions, Wayne.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions and also just a comment. If I start with a comment, Boxer is still available in place of Lector. So there is an option there if you want to use that particular active ingredient, I gather.
Okay, yeah, I would just have to, when I looked up for Lector a couple of days ago, it wasn't showing on the list of approved products anymore. But if there are alternatives still, then yeah, by all means.
Okay, a couple of questions. The first relating to peonies. Has there been any work on Goltex Titan?
Pass. I'm not entirely sure. All I'm aware of, obviously, is at the moment what's been going on at the Cut Flower Centre with Linden. So he may know more.
Perhaps it's one to add to the list, if not for future treatments.
Yeah.
Another one, gladioli. I understand they use dual gold on gladioli in Belgium. Have you looked at this product?
We didn't look at that product. I mean, part of it is because of the restriction with just that May application, and we were trying to look at things that aren't quite so restrictive. Hence why we had a range of different products and the coded products in there. So it's not something that we looked at in that trial. Whether or not other growers have used it in the past, I'm not too sure.
Okay.
So.
A comment from Joe, who's the Ornamentals Crop Protection Officer with AHDB. Just to note that there is no emu for metabromuron for cut flowers yet, only bulbs. We're currently working on it, so it's just a little footnote there, just to remind people.
Yeah, sorry, I should have highlighted that when I gave my talk. I've got metabromuron listed in my experimentals for the thing. I should have highlighted the purely bulbs.
Okay. And one last question, as I look at the time, it's been now 5 minutes over. I'm not quite sure whether you can answer this because it's not one of the crops you mentioned today, but any information on products suitable for weed control over field-grown seedling wallflowers?
We did do some work at the Cut Flower Centre again back in 2014 and 15 on wallflowers, and from the top of my head, I can't think right now of what we found in that, but it is something that I could look into. Can I also I forgot to mention this as well, Wayne, I don't know if you can see this fact sheet, chemical weed control in outdoor cut flower crops. I just wanted to highlight that as something that is quite useful for a bit of information, but bearing in mind it was written in 2017, so some of it is now a bit dated, but there's a lot of different crops in here, both drilled and transplanted, which will give you some information, and then if you work with your advisor or your agronomist, then they can help you kind of build on that. So that's quite a useful fact sheet. But okay. I could find out about wallflowers as well.
Okay, thank you, Chloe. Just to remind people, the fact sheet is chemical weed control in outdoor cut flower crops, and the number is 0217. That should be available on our website if you wish to download it. don't forget to submit the basis, and there are also forms as required. As I said, they're available in the handout box in the menu to the right hand side of your screen. Any further questions, please submit them to me and I'll pass them on to the presenter over the next couple of days if you haven't thought of anything or something springs to mind, perhaps later this afternoon. And as I say, the recording will be made available next week on the AHDB website. The link is there if you want to make a note of it. And please look out for future AHDB horticulture webinars. We have a series planned throughout the upcoming months. We are starting a monthly webinar of various topics the last Thursday evening of each month. So that will be a regular format there for you to keep an eye on. It just to sort of say thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, and good luck with your weed control programs during the coming season. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.